Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, meet in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. A stabbing attack injures 6 Israelis in the occupied city of Al-Khadira. And rockets are seen on the Israel-Lebanon border and sirens sound in Israel. It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're now watching this hour's news bulletin here on Qnews. And we'll start off with the latest developments in Gaza. A meeting between Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, has begun in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Hamas, led by the deputy chairman of its political bureau, Khalil Hayya, and Fatah, led by its deputy head, Mahmoud al-Alul, are meeting to organize Palestine's internal affairs. The meeting also aims to discuss managing border crossings and addressing health, relief, shelter, social development, and educational issues. Egypt's ongoing communications with various parties, especially Israel, the US, and Hamas, aim to maintain negotiations, prevent escalation, and achieve a ceasefire. Six Israelis have been injured in a stabbing attack in the occupied city of Al-Khadira. Israeli media declared that some of the injured are in critical condition and that the assailant was neutralized. The nature of the assailant's motive is still unknown. At least 3 Palestinians have been killed and 15 are injured after Israeli airstrikes on a school in Jabalia that was sheltering displaced individuals. Palestine Red Crescent Society reported that the casualties were transferred to the Baptist Hospital. The Palestinian death toll since the beginning of the Israeli aggression on Gaza has exceeded 42,000 civilians, with more than 97,000 injured. Three Palestinians have been killed and others are injured after an Israeli missile struck a tent housing displaced people in the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. The Palestinian news agency, Wafa, reported that emergency services are still unable to reach many of the casualties and that bodies are still trapped under the rubble as Israeli occupation forces continue to obstruct the movement of ambulances and civil defense crews. The Palestinian death toll from the ongoing Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip has risen to 42,010, with an additional 97,720 individuals sustaining injuries. The Gaza-based health authorities said Israeli occupation forces committed 3 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the last 24 hours, killing at least 45 Palestinians and injuring 130 more. Commissioner General of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, Philippe Lazzarini, says that at least 400,000 people are trapped in northern Gaza. He noted that famine is worsening throughout the region with a severe lack of essential supplies. Lazzarini also revealed that some of the agency's shelters and service centers have had to close for the first time since the war began.
Everywhere in the street, which basically families and kids are living in the rubble or in this sewage water.
The UN Security Council will hold a briefing session followed by closed consultations focusing on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the Palestinian question and the broader regional situation. Algeria and Slovenia, with support from France, requested the meeting. Members are expected to hear two briefings. The first from the head of the finance section of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and the second from the Commissioner General of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees.
I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
الوضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Rockets have been seen on the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah claimed its fighters had pushed back advancing Israeli troops in clashes along the length of the border, while sirens have sounded in northern Israel. Cross-border hostilities have continued in the southern Lebanese town of Qnews. Sirens sounded in northern Israel this morning following overnight airstrikes by Israel on the southern suburbs of Beirut. Dozens were killed and injured as a result of Israeli occupation warplanes bombing towns in southern Lebanon. The occupation raids targeted the town of Wardaniya in Mount Lebanon, the southern suburbs of Beirut, and the towns of Joya, Mahruna, Tibnin, Samaya, Tir Dibba, and Qnews in southern Lebanon. The warplanes also launched raids on the towns of Sarin, Al-Halaniya, and Al-Saida in Beqa Valley. Israeli airstrikes overnight have obliterated 4 residential buildings in the southern Beirut suburb of Dahya. Dozens were killed and injured as a result of Israeli occupation warplanes bombing towns in southern Lebanon. The Lebanese Health Ministry reported that the attacks resulted in 36 fatalities and left 150 individuals injured across the country. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned the Lebanese people that they risk falling into the abyss of a long war. Israel has expanded its ground offensive against Hezbollah by sending thousands more troops into a new zone in southwest Lebanon. Netanyahu also said that Israeli forces had taken out the would-be successors of late Hezbollah leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah without naming them during his televised address.
Just one day after the October 7th massacre a year ago, Hezbollah joined.
United Nations officials have expressed concern about the potential repetition of Gaza's humanitarian disaster in Lebanon amid escalating hostilities. Speaking at a press conference, Matthew Hollingworth, the World Food Programme's country director in Lebanon, said that in the past few weeks, about 1,900 hectares of agricultural land in southern Lebanon had been destroyed. Hollingworth called for preventing the tragedy of the Gaza Strip from being repeated in Lebanon.
Emptied, and many of these towns, villages, and suburbs now little more than rubble.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has made a strong appeal for an immediate ceasefire, both in Gaza and Lebanon. Speaking at a press conference, the UN chief said that the Middle East is a powder keg with many parties holding the match, and that attacks in Lebanon are threatening the entire region. Noting the worsening situation, the UN chief called for an immediate ceasefire and irreversible action for a two-state solution. Guterres also said that draft Israeli legislation that would stop the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency working in the Gaza Strip and West Bank would be a catastrophe if enacted.
About draft legislation that could prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory. Such a measure would suffocate efforts to...
The death toll in Lebanon from the ongoing Israeli attacks has risen to 2,119 since last October, with 10,019 others injured. According to the Lebanese Ministry of Public Health, there has been 36 fatalities and 150 injuries in the past 24 hours across various regions of Lebanon due to the Israeli attacks. Tensions between Hezbollah and Israel escalated following clashes in southern Lebanon, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns the Lebanese and puts conditions for defense minister's visit to Washington.
Amidst Israel's ground incursion in Lebanon and continued offensive in Gaza Strip, sirens sounded last night at Haifa, Accra, and the Western Galilee. Hezbollah reported a clash with Israeli occupation forces attempting to infiltrate towns in southern Lebanon. In response, Hezbollah used artillery shells and rockets, inflicting casualties on the Israeli occupation forces, which led to their retreat. These reciprocal attacks follow Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's warning to the Lebanese people, stating that Lebanon would face severe destruction and suffering similar to that of the Palestinians in Gaza if Hezbollah continues to operate there. Meanwhile, the Gaza Strip saw further Israeli attacks, with local media reporting that an Israeli airstrike on the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza killed at least 3 Palestinians and injured many others. In parallel, Netanyahu postponed Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's scheduled visit to Washington until after a delayed phone conversation with the U.S. President Joe Biden. The conversation is crucial, as Netanyahu also seeks approval from the Israeli Security Cabinet for a military response to last week's missile attack by Iran. However, this escalation has not yet received backing from the U.S., signaling potential friction between Israeli and American strategies in the ongoing conflict.
Prosecutors in the Netherlands have considered requesting to initiate a criminal case against senior Israeli intelligence officials for allegedly obstructing an investigation by the International Criminal Court. A predominantly Palestinian group of 20 submitted the request, urging the Dutch prosecution service to investigate claims that Israel attempted to undermine the ICC's inquiry into alleged crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories. And for more analysis of this story, I'll hand you over now to Selma in the newsroom. Selma.
Thank you, Hani. For further analysis on the latest updates on the International Criminal Court case against Israel, joining us from Liverpool is Trestino Mariniello, Professor of Law at Liverpool, John Moores University, and a member of the legal team for Gaza victims. Sir, thank you for joining us on Q News. We're glad to have you with us to know your inputs on the matter. Let me first start by asking you, what types of evidence and documentation was brought up in the case for Israel's genocide in Gaza?
Well, first of all, many thanks for having me today. The case for genocide in Gaza has been brought by South Africa before the International Court of Justice, as the International Criminal Court is not investigating, at least is not investigating yet, genocide in the Gaza Strip, but the prosecutor, when he requested arrest warrant, the prosecutor Karim Khan, he said clearly that his investigation is still ongoing and he could widen the scope of his report. So what do we know from the International Court of Justice proceedings dealing specifically with genocide in Gaza is that when the South African delegation submitted the complaint that evidence concerned all the plausibly genocidal acts committed by the Israeli authorities in the Gaza Strip, including the massive killings of civilians, the imposition of measures put in place by Israel in order to destroy Palestinians as a protected group. For instance, evidence concerning the destruction of the healthcare system almost entirely in the Gaza Strip, or the prevention of fundamental goods as a consequence of the total siege imposed by the Defense Minister Galland on the 9th of October 2023. But at the same time, the evidence also concerned the so-called genocidal statement put in place by Israeli leaders. Because when it comes to genocide in criminal proceedings, generally the most difficult element to prove is the intent to commit genocide, to destroy the protected groups under the Genocide Convention. And the evidence there directly links to the several statements by Israeli political leaders, like the same Netanyahu, when invited Israeli soldiers to do like in Amalek, so killing everyone, not the statements of the president of Israel saying that there were no civilians in Gaza, or the statement of the defense minister Galland when he said we are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly. This was considered at the time sufficient to establish that there was a risk of genocide in Gaza. There is a risk of genocide, of course.
Now I would like to integrate the international public opinion into our conversation. How does it affect the International Criminal Court of Justice proceedings and decisions on Palestine cases, or is it the other way around?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part clearly. Please, could you repeat it again? My apologies.
Sure. How does the international public opinion affect the proceeding of the International Criminal Court and decisions, or is it the other way around?
Well, the problem is that before going to the public opinion, we should clearly say that this is the biggest, first of all, concerns of the victims of the most serious crimes. And to be clear, so far, the International Criminal Court has failed all the expectations of Palestinian victims in Gaza, but not only, because when we talk about international crimes committed by the Israeli authorities, we should not forget that there is also wide evidence that these international crimes are also committed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The case before the International Criminal Court started in 2009, so 15 years ago, when for the first time the state of Palestine accepted the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. After 15 years, we haven't got yet to the stage of an arrest warrant or summons to appeal. We just had a request, but no arrest warrant has been issued yet. So the perception of the public opinion, but in particular, I would say, of victims, is that we are dealing with an institution that applies policy of double standards and selective justice, which in other words means is prompt in reacting when it comes to international crimes committed in other contexts, like for instance in Ukraine against Russian nationals, but which is delaying justice when it comes to Palestinian victims of the most serious crimes. And as we always say, justice delayed is justice denied.
So, with the International Criminal Court facing constant pressure, especially after it requested arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant back in May on charges for committing war crimes, if you could expand more on the challenges imposed in enforcing the rulings of the International Criminal Court?
Well, the challenges and the pressure are the pressures that are generally exercised by states, so by political bodies, on international organization when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian settings. In particular, Western states have been granted impunity to Israel since 1948. So when it comes to the International Criminal Court, which is the only international organization which can have some deterrent effect, can prevent the Israeli authorities potentially to commit the most serious crimes in the Gaza Strip, there have been incredibly huge pressures by states, in particular by Israel's allies. So we are talking of the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the list of states is long here, exercising pressures on the states. But the court and its staff has also been subject to significant threats against, as I was saying, against its staff. An investigation by the British newspaper Guardian and the magazine Plus 972 revealed how the former director of Mossad was exercising pressure and threats on the former prosecutor and her husband. The court has also received a letter by 12 US senators inviting with strong language the prosecutor not to investigate. So the court is under an incredible pressure, but this incredible pressure does not constitute in any case any justification for the court to act in line with its mandate and issue the arrest warrants as soon as possible.
Thank you so much for your fruitful insights. That was Tristino Marinello, professor of law at Liverpool and member of the legal team for Gaza victims. Thank you so much. Now we're going to move back to Hani for more news and developments around the world.
Thank you, Selma. Now it's time for all the economic news coming up next. Global shares showed mixed performance as Chinese shares plunged, with Shanghai's benchmark down 6.6% and Hong Kong's sliding 1.5%, while other world markets mostly gained. European stocks opened flat. France's CAC 40 rose 0.2% and Germany's DAX changed little. Britain's FTSE 100 climbed 0.5%. The S&P 500 futures were 0.3% lower, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.2%. That brings us to the end of this hour's news bulletin, and here's a reminder of today's main stories. Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, meet in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. A stabbing attack injures 6 Israelis in the occupied city of Al-Khadira. And rockets are seen on the Israel-Lebanon border, and sirens sound in Israel. These are all the news we have for now, but please stay tuned for more updates coming up here on Q News. Thank you for joining us.